My name's Chris. I'm a second-year PhD student here at Novos Music Department in electroacoustic music composition. And I'm looking at how to use wearable sensor sort of data and how you can augment instruments, how that works with machine learning, virtual reality, you name it. I'm sort of exploring how you can use that data in those mediums. However, today, I'm looking at how you can use that in virtual reality as a digital overlay. So essentially, how your embodiment is a digital overlay of virtual reality. So how you can be more immersed in the space through your physical being, in essence. All right, okay, so I won't really spend too much time on this, but basically I'm going to go why I'm looking at interactive music composition, how it works with the data, how that works in VR, and maybe just some thoughts about where the machine learning sort of process can go with, how it can crunch your sort of bodily data, in essence. Right. Okay, so the motivation for the project is, like I said earlier, looking at how you can use this data that captures your embodiment, how you can use that in virtual reality, because over the last few years, it's becoming more and more increasingly used on the consumer market in like wearable sensors, such as the Myo armbands, which I've used with Linda before in the past. Which is a lot cheaper nowadays to use and much more practical. And a lot of research conducted in the past has used bodily data such as like brainwave activity, which is EEG data, like these skull caps that you see, these electrodes on the head. And really, they're good to use because they're kind of exciting to see. Can we hear the unknown, the subconscious, in a way, the mystery behind it. But essentially, it's not too exciting because you can't be very gestural with music, and music composition performance is a very gestural thing, isn't it, when you interact with an instrument, rather than sitting on a chair with electrodes on the head. So I started looking at that. I started looking at game engines. And why game engines? Because they're very multimodal. You can do a lot of things you can't sort of do in a physical, real space. Like you can make things fly, really random things, but use that really creatively. VR is a really interesting thing to use, actually, because at the moment, I don't know if any of you have used VR headsets, but they try and capture your presence as much as possible. So I've been using the Oculus Quest a lot recently, which is the latest Oculus headset. But basically what it's got 4 stereoscopic cameras attached to the headset. So the idea of that is that it can capture your hand movement in front of you, right? It's also got these 2 motion controllers, and those controllers have got optical sensors on. So the idea of that is actually they can capture if you're like pointing a finger, if you're making a fist, So what it's trying to do is trying to capture you as accurately as it can, that being the operative sort of phrase there, because actually it's rather limited because it can't capture how tense you are. For example, if you grab something, you're grabbing it, you're not actually crushing it, for example. Like that data's lost or that detail's lost. So in a way, obviously, it's good because we're getting steps and steps further to interact with in VR and game engines, but it's also limited at the same time. So, yeah. So the idea of that is, if we've got these sensors that are currently being used on VR headsets, how can that be augmented? How can this data that I'm capturing from a wearable armband that captures muscle tension and different movements of each individual muscle. Just as an overview, there are 8 sensors on this armband, so it's quite accurate as to what's going on in the arm, each arm, whichever one. So how can that be used within virtual reality to provide better interactions or more detailed ones? Because obviously when you play a piano or a violin, there's really nuanced behaviours going on in both the arms. So how can that add to the detail, Okay, so I don't want to really go over this too much because a lot of people are composers and musicians here, so they don't really need me to explain it. But interactive music composition obviously started when the MIDI standard was created in '83. But then Michael Vosovitz in 1984 used that technology quite immediately, actually, to create this interface, this gestural interface he created called the hands. So he basically got these buttons that you could press that were attached to the hands, and they created this really interesting sort of processing. So the idea was to use this really new technology, like a computer standard, to process sounds on stage. So I'll play you a little clip of that, actually. Taken in '93. Oh. Short clip, but you get the idea. Okay, if we skip forward now to last year, if again we're in 2020, Imogen Heap is really sort of jumping on this, and is really trying to push it in all of her performances live as too. So she's created these things called the Moo Me gloves, and what they do, they capture your movement of the hand, but nothing really like electromyographic, like muscle tension. It's just movement really. And here is a clip of her explaining how it sort of works and how she can process sounds with gesture.
And here, filtering the sound and kind of
You can't really see that.
And then stopping the arpeggiator and starting it again. So these gloves.
Right, okay, so you get a bit of an idea of what's going on.
And here.
Whoops. Okay, so I've kind of already spoke about this actually, but gesture interfaces are just that. They're just things that you wear, capture your data, quite a wide range of data. So movement, gyration, rotation of the arm. But in this case, which is quite unique to the myo, it's muscle tension, which is what I'm really looking at. So an example of a performance gesture is from this clip. So I was working with Distract Fault. I think when was this? October last year, in the first workshop we had. You have to forgive me, I forgot the name of the cellist's name. Is it Dan?
Dan is the guitarist.
No. The cellist. It will come, okay. And I was testing out how you could make a sort of really, really basic AI sort of system. How this robot for now, I'm not really keen on using that sort of avatar at the moment, but for now at alpha stage it's going to be that. Paul, yeah. Credited.
No, he's not.
For the record.
I remember the name of my cellist, our cellist, but he was dead, sorry.
Excellent. Okay, so yeah, I use the myo to sort of capture this very like visceral fist that he was making after he raised his arm and produces this fist, to sort of investigate how that can be a form of interaction via this tension of the arm. So after he does this, the movement of his arm processes like a granular synth of what he's playing on the cello in real time. And this fist sort of action wakes the avatar up. So this is a performance gesture. Oh. Okay, that's just an example of what I was talking about. Right, so the problem I have is that VR is obviously a very novel tool, and it's blown up in the past few years in every single discipline I can think of, right? So it's just left, right, and centre. Everyone's investigating VR as this thing that's obviously got a lot of room to be investigated. So I don't know if you've seen this. I think Ricardo showed me recently this game called Audica, where it's quite a novel use of the tool, where you sort of there's these some shapes that sort of come towards you, and you got to shoot them in VR, and you sort of have to make different interactions, like like flipping a string, that sort of stuff. So anyway, people are more and more trying to push the boundaries or investigate where this human-computer interaction fits in virtual reality, because it's still such a such a wide area. And also, if research is being conducted in virtual reality, where they're using brainwave activity to, for example, move a stationary person, but with brainwaves, which is a weird concept in virtual reality. Where does EMG data fit in, basically? Because obviously it's much more gestural, especially for music, as I mentioned earlier. Like when we play instruments, we're very gestural with a physical thing. So, obviously it's got room in VR to do that too. And also, just to add to the complexity, where does machine learning fit in? Because obviously it's a really super useful tool for sort of crunching and predicting often complex data that's taken from the arms. How can that be used to increase this interactivity where it's obviously flourishing? Okay, so just very, very basic graph I whipped up in Excel. So what I realised as well when I was using the Oculus Quest controllers is that when you click the trigger at the back, you know, like you used to play, I don't know if you played PlayStation at all, but when you got the controller and you press like R2 or like a trigger at the back, that's just like a really binary operation, isn't it? It's like either off or on. So how can you quantify a gesture in VR? Right now, it's this blue line, which is just off or on. But with this wearable sense technology, you've got potential to fill in the gap completely. So if we can do that, which is this purple line, if we can fill in that gap, you know, what consequences does that have for like music instruments in VR, or I don't know, you name it. It's there. But it's got potential, I think, personally. The solution is there's not really a solution. What I'm trying to do is just trying to best understand it myself by composing pieces and pretty much just solving problems as and when they come up. I often find that's the best solution for me as a composer. Just I'm faced with a problem, okay, I'm going to get around this, and doing it that way. So, instead of bottom up, really, which is instead of going from technical and then applying that in a piece. I've also been looking at machine learning, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, and AI very recently as to how that can fit into understanding how this data is working. I don't really spend too much time on this because I think I've said most of it, but basically, I've been reading loads of different research recently in like engineering, medical science, that's looking at how brainwave activity can fit into virtual reality, and a lot of people have said that it's quite promising how this embodiment can be used to drive the tool and the experience, the user experience. So if this is working at the moment, this brainwave sort of activity and research, you know, how can muscle tension fit into that? Okay, so I'm just going to show you an example of something I've been composing recently. It's a very basic stage, because obviously I'm still trying to understand how this data fits in, how that fits in sonically, etc. But I composed a piece called Musica Tangibile, which is like tangible music. And the pipeline of the piece, in summary, is that I'm receiving this wearable sense technology data from the arm. I'm mapping it and processing the data in MaxMSP. And then I'm sending it to machine learning software called Wekinator, which receives it, processes it, and sends it back to the Unreal Engine, which is a popular sort of game engine software to run the VR. Okay, so this is just quite a short clip of. So what I'm doing in here is I'm making certain gestures that trigger these like cellos that appear, right? And when you do a certain hand gesture, it triggers a particular one. So the machine understands that you're doing that. So what that does, it acts as a sort of like a switch, where if you gradually tense the arm, it affects the speed of like the digital signal processing of the musical sort of element. So in this case, I think it's mainly a granular synth that's either speeding up or slowing down, based on what you can't really see me doing, which is tensing my fist. Okay, I think you get the idea generally. Oh. Okay, again, don't really need to explain this too much, but basically I'm just receiving the data, send it to MaxMSP, and then apply machine learning, and then it's going back to the game engine, right? Okay, but to do that, how do I teach the software to know the difference between different hand gestures, right? Well, basically, I wrote a piece of software recently that gets each of these dots, which is each sensor around the arm, and it makes a visual representation, which is on this side, about actually which ones are being activated and which ones aren't. Because if I can understand that, then I reduce the sort of problem a bit more. I can begin to understand actually that it's only these two actually mean something when I do a certain gesture in my hand. So if I can do that, then actually the problem with machine learning gets much more simplified. Okay, So this is a little clip of me just doing specific hand gestures, and then you should see a different form of activity on the right-hand side for each one. Right, that's get the idea with that. Okay, so has anyone used Wekinator before here? You have, I know. I record. Okay, so basically Wekinator is this piece of software by Rebecca Feebrink in Goldsmiths University in London. I think she created it 2009 it was created. And it's basically an attempt to take a machine learning software and reduce the complexity of it to make it accessible for artists and musicians, essentially, right? So the great thing about it is that you can create a machine learning algorithm by just demonstrating it to the software. Like it's quite immediate like that. It's got a really good user interface. So I use this to capture each sort of gesture and train the computer to recognize them, and then send that to the game engine in VR. And we recently published some research about this actually last year. So myself, Ricardo, and Richard Almendinger from Alliance Manchester Business School here did a collaborative effort to sort of understand actually which machine learning algorithms are best to use in this software and why. And obviously, if you can begin to understand which one's best to use in certain situations, you can begin to understand how to use that better in musical sense. Right? And this is just an example that if you do choose a certain algorithm, it gives you different outputs completely. So it's actually quite an important thing to understand. Right, so yeah, just in summary, I think using digital sort of biometric data as a digital overlay and begin to understand it, I think it's the ripe area in VR right now. And I don't propose to understand it myself completely, but I think if you keep hacking away at it, then maybe it could come with something quite novel. It's very trending. There's a lot of research to sort of look at how biometrics can be used in VR, and it's quite promising. And yeah, basically that's it. Any questions?
Any questions? So how far do you think we are from having an interface that becomes, say, completely natural to the performer? You know, like what I mean, where the gestures we do, they can kind of have a sort of embodied experience where everything they do, they can already imagine, like if I do this, there will be a certain sound experience that will be very like affiliated with that gesture. Do you think we're really far away? Do you think you're like, you know, maybe
In VR or just in real space?
I think eventually the distinction probably doesn't matter in the future, I think, but just in general.
Well, actually, funny enough, you should say that. I went to In Music conference in London last year in December, and there was a guy called Batan Merkowitz, I think his name was, and he created this this interface, this wearable interface that you wear on the finger, and he created this sort of system where you can create music in real time just by making quite natural movements. So in a way, I think that's a step closer than wearing this quite clunky sort of armband. But no, that's a good question, actually. I guess over the next few years, we'll sort of understand it more. But I think maybe the most simplest answer is that a really lightweight, small interface that's capable of capturing all these really complicated signals, biosignals from the body. Yeah, so it could take a while.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.